Welcome back to the channel, guys, and in this video today I'm going to teach you how to mix drums and, more importantly, how not to mix drums. I'll show you step by step how I got the drum sound on my new track. It feels like going from dry drums sounding like this to the finished process drums sounding like this. This is going to be a three-part series of videos. In part one today, we're going to be talking about mixing and processing drums. In part two, we'll be talking about the cymbals. And in part three, we'll be talking about drum buses, sampling, and master bus processing as well. Subscribe below so you don't miss the next two episodes. To listen to the full track, click the card above. Let's get into the video right now. Going into a studio with a plan is the best bit of advice I can give you right now. Talk to an engineer who knows how to get the sounds that you're after with their equipment in their studio. On the kick drum, we used two microphones. We had a Sennheiser E609 just outside the hole, and then we had an Audix D6 inside the bass drum. My favorite mic ever. I use it live and I use it in the studio all the time. Kick drum number one, this is the D6 on the inside. Let's hear how that sounds on its own. Sounds like a bass drum. There's a bit of bleed coming through from the snare drum and the overheads there. With all the microphones, kick, snares and toms mainly, you can manually gate the drums. And what we're gonna do is just show you how to do that. So we zoom in on the track, gonna select press T and I, which is gonna select our chopping tool. And we can chop the transient just after, just before, just after, and just before, etc. Go back TT for the select tool. Let's delete that. Let's delete that. Pressing T and A, which gives us our crossfade tool, is put a little fade on the end there. And you can hear that that's got rid of most of the cymbal sounds. This is great, and this can be very useful, and all the top-end albums, you know, with endless studio budget, they will have somebody going through and manually gating the kick drum, the snare drum, and the toms. It's a very time-consuming process, but manually gating everything with the crossfade gets rid of a lot of the ambient noise. However, it doesn't quite get rid of all the cymbal bleed, because as soon as you hit a hi-hat next to a snare drum mic or a crash cymbal anywhere near a bass drum mic, some of it will bleed through. So the first thing I do on most of my drums is to gate them. Straight to a noise gate. Here we go. Let's hear how the kick drum now sounds with a gate in. So like the manual gate, the software is closing very soon after the transient, blocking out all the excess noise. Now the threshold at which this closes you can adjust, and if you listen to this, that's letting a lot in. Increase the threshold. To the point where you can block out all of the signal, but we don't want that. Now, obviously there's snare drum coming through that, and the reason is we've got bass drum hits on 2 and 4 alongside the snare drum hits, so they're inevitably going to come through as the bass drum itself is opening the gate on this channel. Next thing I added was an SSL channel strip. I was getting into Waves plugins when I mixed this track, and I love these SSL channel strips. They're so useful. There's loads of templates. I scrolled through a bunch of these and I found one that I like, the Hogarth kick with a gate. So there's an extra gate on this channel strip here that's engaged by that button there. And there's a bit of compression, which is useful. And again, further graphic EQs that we can use to control the sound. That sounds like a kick. Now, like I said, I went very surgical and I've added two lots of additional EQs on this. Taking away some low mids, taking away some troublesome resonant frequencies. Ugh. Definitely want rid of that. That's cleaned it up. And some lows, some 70 hertz there for some punch, 67. And some sub-frequencies there as well. A bit more EQ to surgically remove annoying frequencies. Now bear in mind I mixed this on an older set of speakers. I had some Rocket G5s. I probably wouldn't have gone this surgical now, but those speakers have their own character and I didn't have any of the acoustic isolation in the room. And I wasn't using Sonarworks. If you don't know what Sonarworks is, click this video above for a link on a detailed explanation of what that is, how that works, and why you definitely need it for your own home studio. I've added a sub-bass plugin here as well for anything below 50 Hertz, just to give it some depth. Now, when I remixed this track, I went back in and I added some UAD plugins. I've got the Fatso Junior here and the Empirical Labs EL8, and these are super compressors. The EL8 is a distressor, which is a distortion unit and a compressor in one, hence the name distressor, and that makes them sound like this. Ooh. So that's really fattened the sound, thickened it up and giving it a lot of beans, and yes, a bit more volume, which is tricking my ears into making it sound good, but there's a juiciness to that kick drum now, which I really like. Let's go to kick drum mic number 2. This was the Sennheiser 609 outside in the hole on its own. Quite woolly, lots of cymbals. Let's gate that. SSL plugin. That's not actually doing that much. EQs. So I've definitely added some sub in there. Yep, taken out some mids and a bit of the tops just to attenuate some of the cymbal bleed. Now a multi-presser. This is a great tool for kick drums and mixers in general. This is where you can take specific frequency bands and compress just that range of frequencies. There's some extra sub in there as well. Let's hear the two kick drums together. Ooh. So what you'll notice here is that the blend of the microphones they're not even. The main kick drum is the D6, which is the sound out of the two I prefer. So I've boosted that, and the other one I've just blended in for a bit of sub and a bit of woolliness just to fill out the sound a little bit. There are links in the description to buy some of these microphones should you like them. I think these are great, and like I've said, I use all these microphones all the time. I would never try selling anything that I don't use. These are affiliate links, so if you do click on them, it's the same price to you, but I do get a small commission for that. So on the snare drum, we used an Audix i5 on the top and a Shure SM57 underneath. The top microphone soloed on its own. That sounds like a microphone very close to the snare drum head. There's some hi-hat bleed and there's some crash bleed and bass drum bleed in there as well. Let's put a gate on that. So I've really gated that to create a really short sound. Now the transient is very short, but we'll make up for that later. SSL channel strip as well. A little bit of a gate again, some compression and some EQ. That's adding a bit more of a white noise effect to the snare drum. A couple of channel EQs as well. Just to remove anything below 100 Hertz and to surgically remove some frequencies that I didn't like in the sound. Same again, different frequencies, and just boosted a little bit of the tops there. Like I said earlier, it's not always sensible to go this surgical straight away, because some of these frequencies in the mix might not be a problem, and some of these frequencies by the time you've processed all the drum microphones together also might not be a problem, but I got carried away. So on top of this, when I remixed it, I went back in with some UAD plugins, a Pultec EQ, Empirical Labs Fatso Junior, and the Empirical Labs Distressor. These add some weight to the drum. So an essential part of any snare drum sound is reverb. Logic has a great plugin called Space Designer that comes with the software, and you can do loads with it, including EQing the reverb, which can be quite important. So I've come up with a generic gated reverb sound that I've used before, which is using a preset and then tweaking it to my liking. Let's hear how that sounds without the EQ. So that's a long, thick, gated snare drum. But it's a bit boxy, it's a bit woolly, so I don't like that sound. Let's EQ the reverb. It's a lot cleaner. It sounds a little bit brighter because I've scooped out a lot of the low end. Moving on to the bottom snare drum mic. How does that sound on its own? Sounds like a bottom snare drum mic. Plenty of bleed again from all the other instruments. Let's put a gate on that. That's a very quick, sharp gate. Not much else is getting in there. I put an SSL channel strip plugin on this as well, and I found a Chris Lord Algae snare drum bottom template. How does that sound? I think I want the gate a bit higher on that. So it's letting through a bit of the kick drum still, but the snare drum now sounds a bit more like white noise, which is giving that kind of harsh sound, but that's going to sound good in the mix. Added a channel EQ as well. Let's have a look at that. Bit of top end and taking out some lows to clean the sound, and I've surgically taken away some of these resonant frequencies. Happy with that. Compression, bit of volume, bit of thickness, bit of duration to that. Another reverb. And that's just added a nice tone to that snare drum, so I'm happy with that. So what we have to do now is blend the snare drums together. Do you want more bottom snare or do you want more of the top snare? So let's take out the bottom snare. Bring that in. I think about there, sounds good. So with this track, I got a bit carried away with processing the drums individually, and I went very surgical on each one with the EQ, the compression, the gating, and the reverbs, and then worked my way out from individual channels. Another way of doing this, which is what I've done on my next track coming soon called I Wish, is where I've started at the top and worked downwards. What I mean by that is I've worked from the drum buses, and I've worked then down systematically to each microphone and tackled the problems as and when they've arisen. I've tackled problems that might not necessarily have been there, and I spent a lot of time working on these microphones to get them to sound reasonably good, but I think I may have given myself more work than I needed to in hindsight. And that's how I've got the drums sound on this first song, It Feels Like. Stick around for the next video where we talk about mixing and processing the cymbals. Subscribe below so you don't miss that video. Hit the bell notification so you know when that video comes out, and I will see you on the next one.